If you enjoyed this audiobook, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1: How Wealth is Produced. Part 1: The Pin Factory and the Power of Division of Labor. One worker alone can barely make a single pin per day. 10 workers operating together produce 48,000 pins daily. This stunning difference reveals why some nations prosper while others remain poor. Adam Smith witnessed this transformation firsthand at a pin manufacturing facility in 18th century England. The operation fascinated him because it demonstrated something revolutionary about human productivity. Instead of each worker making complete pins from start to finish, the factory divided the process into 18 distinct steps. One worker drew out the wire, another straightened it, a third cut it to length. Others pointed the pins, prepared the heads, and attached them. The mathematics seemed impossible. If a single craftsman working alone could produce perhaps 20 pins daily through enormous effort, how could the same number of workers suddenly create thousands? Smith calculated that each worker in the specialized system effectively produced 4,800 pins per day, a 240-fold increase in productivity. Modern manufacturing validates Smith's observations. Toyota's production system breaks automobile assembly into hundreds of specialized tasks. Boeing constructs aircraft through thousands of discrete operations performed by different teams. Even McDonald's divides burger preparation into specific roles. One person grills patties, another assembles sandwiches, a third operates the fryer. Smith identified 3 reasons why specialization multiplies output so dramatically. Workers develop extraordinary skill when they repeat the same operation hundreds of times daily. Their hands move faster, their movements become more precise, and they spot quality problems immediately. A pinpointer who focuses solely on sharpening wire tips develops capabilities no generalist could match. Time savings provide the second advantage. Workers who switch between different tasks waste minutes walking between workstations, changing tools, and mentally transitioning from one operation to another. Specialized workers eliminate these inefficiencies entirely. They remain at one station, using the same tools, maintaining constant focus on their specific task. The third benefit surprised even Smith. Workers performing repetitive operations began inventing machines to make their jobs easier. The pin factory workers created specialized wire drawing equipment, automated cutting devices, and mechanical pointing tools. Each innovation further multiplied their productivity beyond what human hands alone could achieve. This principle extends far beyond manufacturing. Law firms divide legal work among partners, associates, and paralegals. Hospitals organize care teams with specialized surgeons, anesthesiologists, and nurses. Software companies employ separate programmers for front-end interfaces, back-end systems, and database management. Division of labor creates the foundation for economic growth. As societies organize production more efficiently, they generate surplus wealth that enables investment, innovation, and improved living standards for everyone. Part 2: 3 Sources of Productivity Gains. Smith breaks down productivity gains from specialization into 3 powerful mechanisms that work together to transform economic output. Think of it like learning to play piano. The more you practice specific pieces, the faster and better you become at playing them. The first source comes from workers developing extraordinary skill through endless repetition. When Henry Ford's assembly line workers performed the same car assembly task thousands of times, they became incredibly fast and precise. Their hands moved automatically. Their muscle memory perfected every motion. Compare this to a general mechanic who fixes different car problems occasionally. He'll never match the speed of someone who installs door handles 8 hours daily. Medical residents demonstrate this principle perfectly. A cardiac surgeon who performs the same type of heart surgery repeatedly develops skills far superior to a general surgeon who operates on hearts occasionally. The second mechanism eliminates wasted time between different tasks. Every time workers switch from one job to another, they lose precious minutes gathering new tools, adjusting their workspace, and refocusing their attention. Toyota discovered this when they studied their manufacturing lines. Workers who built complete car sections spent 30% of their time just moving between stations and changing equipment. By keeping workers at specialized stations, Toyota eliminated these transitions and dramatically increased daily output. The third source proves most remarkable. Focused workers naturally invent better tools and methods for their specific tasks. James Watt improved the steam engine while working as an instrument maker at Glasgow University, repeatedly encountering the same mechanical problems. His concentrated experience with steam mechanisms led him to see improvements others missed. Similarly, textile workers in 18th century England continuously improved spinning and weaving machinery because they understood exactly where existing tools failed them. These three effects multiply each other rather than simply adding together. A skilled worker using superior tools while avoiding time-wasting transitions produces exponentially more than the sum of each individual improvement. This compounding effect explains why some nations experience rapid economic growth while others remain poor. Countries that successfully implement specialization see their productivity explode, creating wealth that enables further investment in education, infrastructure, and innovation. Part 3. The Dark Side of Extreme Specialization. When we witness the remarkable productivity gains from specialization, it becomes easy to celebrate this economic revolution without question. Yet, Smith possessed the intellectual honesty to examine both sides of this transformation, recognizing that the same forces creating national wealth could simultaneously destroy human potential. Consider the factory worker who spends 12 hours daily inserting pins into paper. Day after day, year after year, his world shrinks to this single motion. Smith observed that such workers, despite contributing to society's prosperity, often lose the ability to think beyond their immediate task. Their conversations become limited, their curiosity withers, and their capacity for reasoning about complex matters deteriorates. This mental degradation troubles Smith deeply. He notes that workers confined to repetitive tasks become as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. Their intellectual faculties, once capable of growth and adaptation, atrophy from disuse. They struggle to participate meaningfully in conversations about politics, community affairs, or even personal decisions requiring careful judgment. The consequences extend beyond individual suffering. When large portions of the population cannot think critically, they become susceptible to manipulation by demagogues and charlatans. Smith warns that such workers fall prey to the grossest delusions and superstitions, making them unreliable citizens in a democratic society. Real examples from the Industrial Revolution validate Smith's concerns. Factory towns across England reported widespread alcoholism, political extremism, and social unrest among workers trapped in monotonous jobs. The very people whose labor created unprecedented wealth found themselves intellectually impoverished and socially marginalized. Smith's solution proves remarkably progressive for his era. He argues that governments must intervene to provide universal education, ensuring that all citizens develop their rational capacities regardless of their economic function. This represents one of the earliest systematic arguments for public education as a necessary response to industrial capitalism's social costs. The tension Smith identifies remains relevant today. Modern assembly lines, call centers, and data entry operations create similar risks of mental stagnation. Workers performing narrow, repetitive tasks for extended periods often report decreased job satisfaction and reduced cognitive engagement. Yet Smith's framework suggests that education and training can mitigate these effects. Companies investing in worker development, job rotation, and continuous learning often see both productivity gains and improved employee well-being. The key lies in recognizing that human flourishing and economic efficiency need not be mutually exclusive goals. Part 4. Self-interest and the propensity to trade. The key to understanding how complex modern economies function lies in recognizing that people naturally pursue their own interests, not altruistic goals. Adam Smith made this observation over 250 years ago, but it remains the foundation for how markets work today. When you buy your morning coffee, neither you nor the barista is thinking about helping humanity. You want coffee, they want your money. This simple exchange creates mutual benefit without requiring either party to be generous or selfless. Smith famously illustrated this principle with his butcher-brewer-baker passage. He noted that we don't get our dinner from these merchants' kindness, but from their self-interest. The butcher sells meat not to feed the hungry masses, but to earn profit for his family. The baker rises before dawn, not out of community spirit, but because bread sales pay his rent. This insight explains something remarkable about human nature. Unlike other animals, people have an instinctive tendency to trade. A dog cannot exchange bones with another dog. Chimpanzees don't barter fruits for grooming services. But humans naturally engage in truck, barter, and exchange, as Smith put it. Consider how this plays out in practice. When Apple designed the iPhone, they didn't need to coordinate directly with thousands of suppliers worldwide. Instead, they simply offered to pay market prices for components. Suppliers in China, Korea, and Germany responded by producing screens, chips, and cameras, not because they cared about Steve Jobs' vision, but because making these parts generated profits. This self-interested coordination creates something extraordinary. Millions of people across dozens of countries now collaborate to produce smartphones without any central authority directing their efforts. A rubber farmer in Malaysia doesn't need to understand software programming. A software engineer in California doesn't need to know rubber cultivation. Each person focuses on their specialty, trading their output for everything else they need. The beauty of this system lies in its automatic information processing. When consumers suddenly want more electric vehicles, prices for lithium batteries rise. This price signal immediately tells battery manufacturers they should expand production, even though they may not understand why demand increased. The price system communicates needs and opportunities faster than any government planning committee could. This self-interest mechanism explains why markets emerge spontaneously in every human society. From ancient Mesopotamian trading posts to modern stock exchanges, people naturally create systems for mutual exchange. They don't need economists or politicians to explain the benefits. The propensity to trade appears as fundamental to human nature as language or tool use. Part 5. The extent of the market limits specialization. The most skilled watchmaker in a mountain village still fixes shoes and sharpens knives because his market simply cannot support full-time watch repair. This reality illustrates one of Smith's most practical insights about economic development. A craftsman might possess extraordinary talent for making intricate clockwork mechanisms, but if only 5 people in his town own timepieces, he cannot afford to specialize. He must remain a general handyman to survive. The size of the market directly determines how far specialization can advance. Smith observed this principle throughout 18th century Britain. London supported hundreds of specialized trades that would be impossible in smaller towns. A London resident could hire separate craftsmen for making buckles, buttons, ribbons, or lace. Meanwhile, a village blacksmith had to forge horseshoes, repair plows, and craft household implements because local demand could not sustain multiple metalworking specialists. Consider modern Silicon Valley compared to rural Montana. Silicon Valley's massive concentration of tech companies creates markets deep enough to support hyper-specialized roles like machine learning optimization engineers or user interface designers focused solely on mobile checkout flows. Rural Montana simply lacks sufficient demand for such narrow expertise. Transportation infrastructure becomes crucial because it expands effective market size. Smith emphasized how navigable rivers, canals, and coastal access dramatically increase the potential customer base for specialized producers. Before railroads connected American regions, a furniture maker in Ohio could only serve local customers. Once rail networks linked Ohio to eastern cities, that same craftsman could specialize in producing just dining tables and ship them nationwide. This explains why major industries clustered geographically. Detroit became the auto capital not just because of Henry Ford's innovations, but because the Great Lakes provided cheap transportation for both raw materials and finished vehicles. Once automakers concentrated there, the region developed increasingly specialized suppliers for everything from carburetors to upholstery. The principle works in reverse, too. When markets shrink, specialization retreats. Many small American towns that once supported separate bakeries, butcher shops, and hardware stores now have only general stores or gas stations, offering basic versions of everything. Economic decline forces workers back toward generalization. This market size limitation means that infrastructure investment directly drives economic development. Better roads, ports, and communication networks expand the effective market for specialized producers, enabling the productivity gains that create wealth. Smith understood that the division of labor depends entirely on the division of markets. Chapter 2: Prices, Wages, and Capital. Part 1: Natural price versus market price. Think your favorite local coffee shop always charges fair prices? Adam Smith discovered something fascinating that challenges this assumption entirely. Picture walking into that coffee shop on a busy Monday morning. You pay $5 for your usual latte, the same price as last week. But Smith revealed that this simple transaction involves two completely different types of prices working behind the scenes. The first price is what Smith called the natural price. Think of this as the true cost of making your latte. It includes paying the barista a decent wage, covering rent for the shop space, and providing a reasonable return to the owner who invested money in equipment. This natural price acts like gravity in the economic world, always pulling other prices toward it. The second price is the market price, what you actually pay at the counter. This fluctuates constantly based on immediate conditions. During finals week, when students desperately need caffeine, market prices might spike above natural prices. During summer break, when campus empties, they might drop below. Here's where Smith's insight becomes powerful. When Starbucks noticed their market prices consistently exceeded natural prices in the 1990s, what happened? Competitors like Dunkin' Donuts and local cafes rushed to open new locations. This increased supply eventually drove market prices back down toward natural levels. Consider the dot-com boom, when software engineers commanded salaries far above natural prices. Companies expanded computer science programs, more students enrolled, and eventually the increased supply of programmers brought wages closer to natural levels after the bubble burst. Smith observed this pattern everywhere. When market prices rise above natural prices, producers smell opportunity and increase output. When market prices fall below natural prices, some producers exit the market. This invisible mechanism coordinates millions of individual decisions without any central planning. Netflix demonstrates this principle perfectly. When streaming became profitable above natural price levels, dozens of competitors entered: Disney+, HBO Max, Amazon Prime Video. The resulting competition has driven subscription prices toward natural levels while improving service quality. This framework explains why shortages and surpluses tend to self-correct in free markets. It also reveals why government price controls often backfire. They prevent this natural adjustment mechanism from working. Smith's distinction between these two types of prices became the foundation for understanding how markets automatically coordinate resource allocation across entire economies. Part 2: The three components of price. Every price you pay at the store contains three hidden components that Adam Smith discovered, fighting for their share of your dollar. Whether you buy a coffee, rent an apartment, or purchase a smartphone, The money splits between workers' wages, business owners' profits, and landlords' rent. Consider Apple's iPhone pricing strategy. When you pay $999 for the latest model, roughly $501 goes to component suppliers and assembly workers as wages. About $300 flows to Apple as profit for organizing production and taking risks. The remaining $198 covers rent for retail stores, factories, and office buildings where the phone gets designed and sold. These three revenue streams constantly battle each other, like contestants in an economic tug-of-war. When warehouse workers at Amazon demand higher wages, those increased labor costs squeeze profit margins unless the company raises prices. Similarly, when commercial real estate rents spike in Manhattan, restaurants must either accept lower profits or charge customers more for meals. Smith observed that capital accumulation creates fascinating ripple effects through this three-way competition. As businesses invest in new equipment and expand operations, they hire more workers. This increased demand for labor drives up wages, which benefits employees but reduces profits for business owners. The coffee shop that installs expensive espresso machines needs skilled baristas, bidding up wages for experienced workers throughout the industry. Walmart illustrates this dynamic perfectly. The company's massive investment in distribution centers and technology has created millions of jobs, gradually pushing up wages in retail and logistics. However, these higher labor costs have compressed Walmart's profit margins over time, forcing continuous efficiency improvements to maintain profitability. This framework explains why different social classes sometimes have conflicting economic interests despite overall prosperity. Workers want higher wages, landlords prefer rising rents, and business owners seek maximum profits. A thriving economy benefits everyone, but the gains distribute unevenly among these groups. Understanding price decomposition helps explain major economic trends. Rising housing costs in San Francisco reflect limited land supply, increasing rent's share of local prices. Meanwhile, automation in manufacturing reduces labor share while boosting returns to capital owners. These shifts reshape society as different groups gain or lose economic influence. Smith's analysis reveals that economic growth doesn't automatically benefit all participants equally. The relative bargaining power of workers, capital owners, and landlords determines how prosperity gets divided, creating the political tensions we still observe today between different economic classes competing for larger shares of the economic pie. Part 3. Why wages differ across occupations. Have you ever wondered why a surgeon earns vastly more than a construction worker, even though both require skill and training? Smith discovered that wage differences stem from far more than simple supply and demand calculations. Consider the construction worker who endures scorching heat, bitter cold, and constant physical danger. Smith recognized that unpleasant working conditions demand higher compensation to attract workers. This explains why garbage collectors in New York City earn surprisingly good wages despite requiring minimal formal education. The job's disagreeable nature, early morning hours, unpleasant odors, physical demands, creates what economists call compensating differentials. The cost and difficulty of learning a trade creates another wage barrier. Medical school requires 8 years of intensive study plus residency training, representing enormous upfront investment. Smith observed that professions demanding extensive preparation naturally command higher wages to justify the time and expense. A heart surgeon's fees reflect not just current skill, but years of sacrificed earnings during training. Employment irregularity also drives wage premiums. Hollywood actors might earn substantial daily rates, but most face long periods without work. Smith noted that irregular employment requires higher hourly compensation to maintain annual income comparable to steady jobs. Construction workers in northern climates receive premium wages, partly because winter weather creates seasonal unemployment. Trust requirements create another wage differential. Bank executives handling millions in assets earn more than equally educated employees in other industries. Smith recognized that positions requiring exceptional honesty and responsibility demand premium compensation. Employers pay extra for reliability when betrayal could cause massive losses. Finally, success probability affects wages across entire professions. Most aspiring professional athletes never achieve stardom, yet the few who succeed earn enormous sums. Smith explained that high-risk careers requiring exceptional talent must offer potentially huge rewards to attract participants despite low success odds. The lottery-like nature of these professions means winners must earn enough to compensate all the losers who invested similar effort. These 5 factors – work conditions, training requirements, employment stability, trust levels, and success probability – combine to create the complex wage structure we observe today. A software engineer earning more than a teacher reflects not just market forces, but the interaction of training costs, work environment differences, and career uncertainty levels. Smith's analysis reveals that wage inequality often serves important economic functions, ensuring unpleasant but necessary jobs get done while encouraging investment in valuable skills. Part 4. Fixed versus circulating capital. Why does a bakery own ovens while a grain trader merely buys and sells? Smith's distinction between fixed and circulating capital explains this fundamental difference in how businesses operate. Fixed capital generates revenue while staying put. Think of a textile mill's spinning machines, a farmer's improved land, or a merchant's warehouse. These assets produce income year after year without changing hands. The spinning machine turns cotton into thread, the fertile field yields multiple harvests, and the warehouse enables profitable storage and distribution. All create value while remaining under the same ownership. Circulating capital tells a different story. It must move to make money. Raw cotton becomes thread, then cloth, then finished garments sold to consumers. Each transformation adds value, but the capital itself disappears in the process. A grain merchant buying wheat in harvest season and selling it months later exemplifies circulating capital. The wheat must leave his possession to generate profit. Consider 2 real businesses from Smith's era. Matthew Boulton's Soho manufactory near Birmingham required massive fixed capital investment in steam engines, precision machinery, and specialized buildings to produce everything from buttons to coins. Most of Boulton's wealth sat locked in equipment that generated revenue through production rather than sale. Meanwhile, London's East India Company operated primarily with circulating capital. They purchased spices, tea, and textiles in Asia, shipped these goods to European markets, and sold them for profit. Their capital constantly circulated, buying in one location, transporting, then selling in another. This distinction shapes entire industries. Manufacturing naturally demands more fixed capital because production requires specialized equipment and facilities. A modern automobile factory needs billions in fixed assets, robotic assembly lines, paint shops, testing facilities that generate value through use rather than sale. Commerce relies more heavily on circulating capital. Amazon's retail business exemplifies this pattern. While they own some warehouses, fixed capital, their core business involves purchasing goods and reselling them to customers. Their capital circulates through inventory rather than sitting in machinery. Smith recognized that nations grow wealthy when people save money and channel it into productive capital rather than consuming luxury goods or hoarding cash. But the type of capital matters enormously. A country needs the right balance. Too much fixed capital without sufficient circulating capital creates productive capacity without the working materials to use it. Too much circulating capital without adequate fixed capital means merchants compete fiercely over limited production capacity. This balance determines whether an economy emphasizes making things or trading them, a choice that shapes everything from employment patterns to international competitiveness. Part 5. Profit Rates and Economic Health. When businesses earn exceptionally high profits, most people assume the economy is thriving. But Adam Smith discovered the opposite truth holds more often than we realize. Smith observed something counterintuitive about profit rates that modern economists still debate today. In Holland during his era, businesses earned much lower profit rates than their counterparts in Bengal or Jamaica. Yet Dutch workers lived far better lives, and the Dutch economy demonstrated remarkable stability and growth. Meanwhile, the high-profit colonies suffered from economic stagnation and widespread poverty among workers. This pattern reveals a fundamental truth about how economies actually function. High profit rates typically emerge from two problematic conditions. Either capital is extremely scarce, forcing borrowers to pay premium rates, or businesses have eliminated competition through monopoly power. Neither situation benefits society as a whole. Consider how this plays out in real markets. When a few companies control an entire industry, they can charge whatever prices they choose. Their profit margins soar, but consumers suffer from limited choices and inflated costs. Smith witnessed this repeatedly in his observations of colonial trade monopolies, where exclusive trading privileges generated enormous profits for merchants while creating artificial scarcity for everyone else. The more troubling discovery Smith made concerned business behavior toward public policy. He noticed that merchants and manufacturers consistently advocated for regulations that would benefit their particular interests rather than society broadly. They would petition governments for protective tariffs, exclusive trading rights, or restrictions on new competitors entering their markets. Smith warned legislators to approach such proposals with deep skepticism. When businesses claim their special interests align with national prosperity, they usually mean the opposite. A textile manufacturer seeking import restrictions might argue this will strengthen domestic industry. But the real goal is eliminating foreign competition to maintain higher prices. The healthiest economies actually display falling profit rates over time. This happens when successful businesses attract more capital investment, creating additional competitors who bid down prices and profit margins. Consumers benefit from better products at lower costs, while the increased competition drives innovation and efficiency improvements. This dynamic explains why thriving commercial centers like Amsterdam or London experienced declining profit rates during periods of rapid economic expansion. More businesses meant more competition, which meant smaller profit margins, but greater overall prosperity for workers and consumers alike. The economy was generating wealth faster than any individual business could capture it. Chapter 3: Historical Origins of Commercial Society, Part 1: 4 Stages of Economic Development. People often wonder why some societies developed thriving markets while others remained stuck in older systems for centuries. Smith identified 4 distinct phases that societies naturally progress through, each creating its own rules about who owns what and how people relate to each other. Think of these stages like climbing stairs. Each step builds on the previous one, creating entirely different ways of organizing human cooperation. The first stage revolves around hunting and gathering. Native American tribes, like the Cherokee, before European contact, exemplify this phase. People owned few permanent possessions beyond basic tools and weapons. Leadership remained fluid, with decisions made collectively. No formal courts existed because disputes were rare and resolved through tribal customs. Pastoral societies represent the second stage, where groups began domesticating animals. The Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan demonstrates this phase perfectly. Wealth meant owning large herds of horses, sheep, and cattle. Social hierarchy emerged based on herd size. Property concepts expanded beyond personal items to include animals, but land remained commonly held. Military organization became more sophisticated because pastoral peoples needed to defend their mobile wealth. Agricultural societies mark the third stage, dominating European history for over 1,000 years. Medieval England under the feudal system shows this development clearly. Land became the primary source of wealth and power. Complex property relationships emerged. Peasants worked plots they didn't own, owing labor and crops to landlords. Social mobility remained extremely limited. Legal systems developed to enforce these hierarchical arrangements, with different laws applying to nobles, clergy, and commoners. The commercial stage represents humanity's fourth development phase. Dutch merchants in the 17th century pioneered this transformation. Private property extended beyond land to include businesses, patents, and financial instruments. Social relations became increasingly contractual rather than hereditary. People could accumulate wealth through trade, innovation, and enterprise, regardless of birth circumstances. Each transition happened gradually, often taking centuries. Roman agricultural practices influenced medieval European farming. Medieval guilds evolved into modern corporations. These changes weren't planned by governments or philosophers. They emerged naturally as people responded to new opportunities and challenges. Understanding this progression explains why certain practices persist long after their original purpose disappears. Modern property laws still reflect agricultural stage assumptions about land ownership. Some societies skip stages entirely when exposed to advanced technologies, creating unique hybrid systems that blend elements from different developmental phases. Part 2. The fall of feudalism through luxury consumption. Feudal lords possessed armies of retainers who ensured their dominance for centuries. Yet these same lords engineered their own downfall through shopping habits. The transformation began innocuously. Great landowners accumulated massive agricultural surpluses from their vast estates. Instead of maintaining hundreds of armed followers, they discovered something more appealing. Merchants arriving from distant towns carrying exquisite goods, fine silks from Italy, intricate jewelry from skilled craftsmen, elaborate furniture that displayed refined taste. These luxury items offered immediate gratification rather than the ongoing expense of feeding and housing retainers. Consider England's medieval barons. A typical lord might support 50 armed men at considerable annual cost. That same expense could purchase stunning tapestries, ornate silverware, and fashionable clothing that impressed visitors far more than rough soldiers lounging in the hall. The economic calculation seemed obvious. This preference for luxury consumption created an unexpected chain reaction. Every purchase strengthened merchant networks and urban workshops. Gold that once paid warriors now flowed to artisans, traders, and manufacturers. These commercial classes reinvested profits into expanding operations, hiring more workers, and developing new products. The feudal lords unknowingly funded their own replacement. Each ornate goblet purchased meant one fewer loyal retainer. Each bolt of silk represented diminished military capacity. The great estates still generated wealth, but that wealth now served commercial interests rather than feudal power structures. Merchants grew wealthy and influential, while lords became dependent on market relationships. When conflicts arose, lords could no longer summon private armies. Their former retainers had scattered to seek employment elsewhere or joined the growing ranks of wage laborers in expanding towns. France's aristocracy followed similar patterns. The Palace of Versailles exemplifies this transformation perfectly. Nobles competed through elaborate displays of luxury rather than military prowess. They bankrupted themselves purchasing court fashions while losing the armed support that originally justified their privileges. The irony runs deeper still. Lords believed they were enhancing their status through conspicuous consumption. Instead, they systematically dismantled the military foundation of feudalism. Their appetite for beautiful objects accomplished what peasant rebellions and royal interventions had failed to achieve. This historical lesson reveals how unintended consequences drive social change. The lords never intended to destroy feudalism. They simply wanted prettier possessions. Yet their individual choices, multiplied across generations, revolutionized European society. Economic self-interest, pursuing immediate pleasures, inadvertently created the conditions for commercial civilization. Modern parallels exist everywhere. Traditional industries often fund their own disruption by purchasing innovative technologies from competitors. Established companies buy software solutions that eventually eliminate need for their services. Consumer choices consistently shape economic structures in ways that surprise even the consumers themselves. Part 3. Legal obstacles to economic progress. Legal barriers created artificial bottlenecks that trapped wealth and talent in outdated systems for centuries. Consider England's primogeniture laws, which mandated that entire estates pass to the eldest son. Younger brothers received nothing substantial, regardless of their abilities or ambitions. This system kept vast landholdings frozen in aristocratic families for generations. The Duke of Bedford's estate, for example, remained intact from the 1500s through the 1700s under these rules. Brilliant younger sons with innovative ideas couldn't access the capital needed to develop improvements or start new ventures. Meanwhile, productive farmers and entrepreneurs couldn't purchase land to expand operations. The most fertile acres stayed with families who often lacked interest or skill in agriculture. Smith observed how this artificial scarcity prevented land from reaching those who could use it most effectively. France maintained similar restrictions until the Revolution, contributing to widespread rural poverty despite abundant natural resources. Entails compounded these problems by legally preventing landowners from selling or dividing their properties. Even current owners couldn't respond to market opportunities. When cotton manufacturing exploded in the 1760s, English landowners bound by entails couldn't sell portions of their estates to finance textile mills. Capital remained stuck in underproductive agricultural holdings, while manufacturing opportunities went to those with liquid wealth. Corporate monopolies created equally damaging restrictions on trade. The Hudson's Bay Company held exclusive rights to vast Canadian territories for 2 centuries. This monopoly prevented competitive fur trading, limited exploration of resources, and restricted settlement. Alternative trading arrangements that might have developed the region more rapidly never emerged because legal privileges blocked entry. Smith documented how the East India Company's monopoly on Asian trade inflated prices throughout Europe while generating enormous profits for shareholders. Dutch merchants couldn't compete in spice markets despite superior shipping methods. French traders faced legal barriers when attempting to establish alternative routes. These exclusive privileges protected established interests while denying consumers better prices and preventing more efficient operations from emerging. Removing such barriers transformed economic activity dramatically. When Parliament gradually reduced the East India Company's privileges in the 1810s, trade volumes increased substantially. Prices dropped as competition emerged. New shipping technologies developed rapidly once entrepreneurs could enter previously restricted markets. Smith's analysis reveals how legal structures either facilitate or obstruct economic progress. Well-intentioned laws protecting established property rights often prevent beneficial changes. Modern examples abound: taxi medallion systems limiting ride-sharing services, professional licensing requirements restricting competition, zoning laws preventing mixed-use development. These contemporary barriers operate through the same mechanisms Smith identified centuries ago. Natural market forces, when freed from artificial constraints, direct resources toward their most valuable applications. This process happens automatically as individuals pursue personal advantage within competitive frameworks. The legal framework either supports this beneficial coordination or blocks it through privileges and restrictions favoring particular groups. Part 4. The Rise of Towns and the Reciprocal Market. Medieval European towns started as small, desperate communities begging kings for protection from feudal lords who controlled the countryside. Picture these early urban settlements as scrappy underdogs facing powerful agricultural barons who owned vast estates and commanded armies of peasants. The towns needed royal charters to survive, essentially buying their independence with promises of tax revenue that kings desperately needed to fund their wars. These royal charters created something revolutionary: islands of freedom within a sea of feudal control. While peasants remained bound to their lord's land, townspeople could move freely, choose their occupations, and conduct business with anyone willing to trade. The merchants of Venice received such protection in 1082, transforming a collection of marshy islands into Europe's wealthiest trading hub within 2 centuries. Initially, these towns acted like economic pirates. They produced little food, but consumed plenty, taking agricultural products from the countryside while offering manufactured goods that rural populations neither understood nor particularly wanted. Feudal lords viewed towns as parasites, draining wealth from their territories. This relationship resembled a wealthy suburb extracting resources from surrounding farming communities while contributing little in return. Yet something unexpected happened over generations. Rural populations began craving the goods that urban artisans produced. A peasant who had never seen fine cloth suddenly wanted it once merchants displayed their wares at local markets. Farmers discovered that iron tools made their work easier and more productive. The lords themselves developed appetites for luxury items that only skilled craftsmen could create. This shift transformed parasitic relationships into mutually beneficial exchanges. Towns needed grain, meat, wool, and timber that only rural areas could provide. Countryside populations increasingly demanded manufactured goods, processed foods, and specialized services available only in urban centers. What started as exploitation evolved into interdependence. Consider how Florence exemplified this transformation. The city began as a modest trading post, but became Europe's banking capital by creating financial instruments that farmers needed to buy land and equipment. Florentine clothmakers purchased raw wool from English shepherds, processed it into luxury fabrics, then sold finished goods back to rural English nobility. Both regions prospered through this exchange. This reciprocal market system gradually replaced the rigid social hierarchies that defined feudal society. Instead of inherited status determining economic relationships, contractual agreements between willing parties became the foundation of commercial life. A merchant's wealth mattered more than his bloodline. A craftsman's skill commanded respect regardless of his family background. The geographic division of labor that emerged from these town-country relationships created the integrated market economy that Smith recognized as commercial society's defining characteristic. Different regions specialized in producing what they did best, then traded their surpluses for goods they could not efficiently produce themselves. Part 5. Commerce and the Growth of Personal Liberty. When economic relationships shift from personal bonds to market transactions, something profound happens to human freedom that most people never consider carefully. The transformation from feudal dependency to commercial independence represents one of history's most significant expansions of personal liberty. Under feudalism, a peasant's entire existence depended on maintaining good relationships with his lord. His access to land, protection from bandits, and even permission to marry required the lord's approval. This personal dependence created a form of economic slavery disguised as mutual obligation. Commercial society operates on fundamentally different principles. A baker today sells bread to anyone with money, regardless of their social status or personal relationships. A carpenter chooses between multiple employers based on wages and working conditions. A merchant builds wealth through successful ventures rather than inherited titles. These market relationships may seem purely economic, but they represent a revolutionary expansion of human choice. Consider the transformation of England between 1400 and 1700. Medieval serfs could not leave their lord's estate without permission. By the 18th century, workers moved freely between employers, negotiating wages and changing jobs when better opportunities emerged. This nobility required no political revolution or philosophical manifesto. Market forces gradually eroded the personal dependencies that had defined social life for centuries. The connection between economic independence and political freedom becomes clear when examining historical examples. In medieval France, wealthy merchants gradually purchased royal offices and noble titles, translating commercial success into political influence. Dutch merchants in the 17th century used their economic power to establish republican government and religious tolerance. These societies developed more egalitarian institutions precisely because economic relationships had loosened traditional hierarchies. Smith recognized that commerce accomplishes what political reformers often cannot achieve through direct action. When people can accumulate wealth through enterprise rather than inheritance, when workers can choose their employers, and when success depends on serving customers rather than pleasing patrons, the entire structure of society shifts toward greater equality and individual dignity. This process continues today. Countries with more developed commercial institutions consistently rank higher on measures of political freedom and social mobility. The ability to participate in markets as equals, regardless of family background or social connections, remains one of commerce's most powerful contributions to human liberty. The expansion of market relationships thus represents more than economic progress. It fundamentally reshapes the possibilities for human flourishing by replacing arbitrary personal authority with voluntary exchange between equals. Chapter 4. Trade, Government, and the Limits of Mercantilism. Part 1. The Fallacies of the Mercantilist System. The mercantilist system dominated European economic thinking for centuries, but its fundamental premise was spectacularly wrong. Adam Smith recognized that treating gold and silver as the sole measure of national wealth was like judging a person's health by counting their coins rather than examining their actual vitality. Spain provides the perfect cautionary tale. Despite draining enormous quantities of precious metals from its American colonies, Spain remained economically stagnant, while gold-poor nations like Holland flourished. The Spanish crown accumulated vast treasure, yet saw its people grow poorer, its agriculture decline, and its manufacturing industries wither. Meanwhile, Dutch merchants built a commercial empire through trade, innovation, and productive enterprise. Smith understood that real wealth comes from the ability to produce and consume useful goods, not from hoarding shiny metals. A nation rich in wheat, cloth, tools, and skilled workers enjoys genuine prosperity. A nation sitting on mountains of gold but unable to feed its people or manufacture necessities remains fundamentally poor. Mercantilist policies created perverse incentives that enriched politically connected groups while harming everyone else. Export bounties essentially paid domestic producers to sell goods abroad rather than serve their own countrymen. Import restrictions forced citizens to buy inferior domestic products at inflated prices. These policies transferred wealth from ordinary consumers to favored industries through government force. The East India Company exemplifies how mercantilist monopolies operated. Parliament granted this corporation exclusive trading rights with India, allowing it to charge British consumers far above competitive prices for tea, spices, and textiles. Meanwhile, Indian producers received below-market compensation since they could only sell to one buyer. Both British consumers and Indian producers suffered, so that company shareholders and their political allies could profit. Smith observed that these policies created what modern economists call rent-seeking behavior. Industries learned they could earn higher profits through political influence than through genuine improvement. Sugar planters lobbied for protective tariffs rather than investing in better cultivation methods. Wool manufacturers sought restrictions on clothing imports instead of improving their own efficiency. This political corruption of economic activity violated Smith's core insight about how prosperity actually grows. When businesses compete freely to serve consumers, they must constantly innovate and reduce costs. When they can rely on government protection instead, they grow lazy and wasteful. The result is slower economic growth and higher prices for everyone except the politically privileged few. The mercantilist obsession with maintaining a positive balance of trade also missed a crucial point about the nature of voluntary exchange. When two parties trade freely, both benefit or the exchange would not occur. Forcing your trading partners into poverty ultimately makes them less valuable customers. Part 2. The case for free trade and specialization. Imagine trying to bake your own bread, weave your own clothes, and build your own furniture while working a full-time job. You would quickly realize the absurdity of such an approach. Yet entire nations have attempted precisely this economic strategy, and the results have been as predictable as they are disastrous. Smith recognized that countries, like individuals, possess different strengths and capabilities. Scotland might excel at whiskey production while France perfects winemaking. Rather than forcing Scottish vineyards to compete with French distilleries, both nations prosper when each focuses on what it does best. This principle extends far beyond agriculture into manufacturing, services, and innovation. The Scottish economist David Ricardo later formalized this concept as comparative advantage, but Smith laid the groundwork with compelling real-world observations. He noted that English cloth often costs less than domestic alternatives in many European markets, not because England possessed superior wool or climate, but because English manufacturers had developed more efficient production methods through specialization and competition. Consider the modern example of South Korea's transformation. In the 1960s, the country attempted to produce everything domestically, from steel to semiconductors to automobiles, often with disappointing results. When South Korea began specializing in electronics and shipbuilding while importing food and raw materials, its economy exploded. Samsung started as a small trading company but became a global technology leader by focusing intensively on what it could do better than competitors worldwide. Protective tariffs create what economists now call deadweight loss. When governments force citizens to buy expensive domestic products instead of cheaper foreign alternatives, they essentially tax consumers to subsidize inefficient producers. The American steel tariffs of the early 2000s provide a stark illustration. While protecting a few thousand steel jobs, these policies increased costs for millions of workers in steel-using industries like construction and manufacturing. Smith understood that free trade expands markets beyond national borders. A village blacksmith might serve only local farmers, but a specialized tool manufacturer can sell to customers across continents. This larger market justifies investments in better equipment, training, and innovation. The result is higher quality products at lower prices. The beauty of this system lies in its voluntary nature. No central authority decides which countries should produce which goods. Market prices and competition naturally guide resources toward their most productive uses. When consumers freely choose the best products regardless of origin, they reward efficiency and innovation while punishing waste and complacency. This spontaneous coordination creates wealth for all participants, contradicting the mercantilist belief that one nation's gain requires another's loss. Part 3. The invisible hand and spontaneous order. The most powerful example of this coordination happened right under Adam Smith's nose. In 1776, the same year The Wealth of Nations was published, pin manufacturing in Birmingham employed thousands of workers without any government official directing their actions. Smith watched this industry with fascination. No bureaucrat told pin makers how many pins to produce each day. No royal decree set pin prices. Yet somehow, exactly the right number of pins reached exactly the right customers at prices both could accept. When demand for pins increased, prices rose slightly, attracting more workers and investment. When someone invented a better pin-making technique, competitors quickly adopted it or lost customers. This coordination puzzled most economists of Smith's era. They assumed someone important must be pulling the strings. Kings appointed trade ministers. Guilds controlled production quotas. Mercantilists demanded export bounties and import bans. Surely such complex economic activity required deliberate management. Smith saw something different. The pin maker who raised prices too high lost customers to competitors. The one who paid workers too little found his best employees leaving for rival firms. The merchant who stocked unpopular pin styles watched inventory pile up while competitors sold out. Each person, pursuing purely selfish goals, accidentally served everyone else. Consider James Watt, whose improved steam engine design emerged during this period. Watt never intended to help humanity. He wanted profit and recognition. Yet his self-interested tinkering revolutionized manufacturing, transportation, and mining. Consumers got better products. Workers found higher-paying jobs operating new machinery. Society advanced through individual ambition. This happens because competitive markets create what Smith called an invisible hand. When you buy the cheapest bread, you reward the most efficient baker without meaning to help anyone except yourself. When entrepreneurs invest in promising new technologies, they accidentally fund innovations that benefit millions of future users. When workers change jobs, seeking better wages, they accidentally move labor toward its most productive uses. The beauty of this system lies in its automatic nature. No central planner needs to calculate optimal pin production or steam engine improvements. Price signals carry all necessary information. Rising bread prices tell farmers to plant more wheat. Falling horse prices signal the coming importance of railroads. Profits guide investment toward promising opportunities, while losses eliminate wasteful ventures. This insight challenged everything 18th century rulers believed about governance. Most assumed social order required constant royal intervention. Smith proved that voluntary exchange between strangers creates more coordination than armies of bureaucrats could ever achieve. Part 4. The proper duties of the sovereign. Smith's invisible hand explanation might suggest that government should disappear entirely, but Smith himself thought otherwise. He carefully outlined 3 specific jobs that only government could handle properly, and society needed all 3 to function. First comes national defense. Private armies serve whoever pays them best, making them unreliable protectors of national interests. Smith watched European wars demonstrate how mercenary forces switch sides when offered better terms. Only a sovereign army answers to the nation's long-term survival rather than short-term profit opportunities. Second, the administration of justice requires government oversight. Courts must enforce contracts impartially and protect property rights. Private arbitrators might favor wealthy clients or powerful trading companies. Smith observed how merchant guilds in medieval cities corrupted local justice systems to benefit their members. Independent judges, paid by public funds rather than private parties, can maintain the rule of law that makes market exchange possible. The third duty proves most complex: providing public works and institutions that benefit everyone but generate no direct profit for private investors. Consider roads connecting remote farming communities to city markets. These highways help farmers sell crops and consumers access food, creating widespread benefits. However, no private company can capture enough revenue from improved rural roads to justify construction costs. Smith witnessed this problem firsthand in 18th century Scotland, where poor transportation isolated highland communities from lowland prosperity. Private turnpike companies built profitable routes between major cities, but ignored less traveled paths that still served important economic functions. Education presents another example. A literate workforce benefits every employer and strengthens democratic institutions, but individual companies cannot capture these broader social returns from funding schools. Smith argued that basic education creates positive spillover effects throughout society that markets alone cannot provide. Financing these essential functions requires taxation, and Smith insisted on two key principles. Taxes should reflect people's ability to pay rather than hitting everyone equally. A fixed tax burden devastates poor families while barely affecting wealthy households. Second, tax collection should minimize administrative waste. Complex systems that require armies of bureaucrats consume resources that could otherwise fund actual public services. Smith's framework recognizes that markets excel at coordinating private interests, but sometimes need government support to serve broader social needs. The challenge lies in limiting government to these essential functions while preventing political interference in areas where market mechanisms work effectively. Part 5. Critiques of specific policies and practices. Smith took aim at several specific policies that violated his principles of economic freedom and human welfare. He understood that good theories mean nothing without examining real-world practices that hurt ordinary people. Consider slavery, which many of Smith's contemporaries accepted as normal business. Smith called it both morally wrong and economically stupid. Why? Slaves have zero reason to work hard since they receive nothing from their extra effort. A free worker earning wages will hustle to keep his job and maybe earn more. But a slave? He gets fed the same, whether he works hard or barely moves. Smith observed that free labor consistently outproduced slave labor across different regions and industries. Public debt represented another form of generational theft that angered Smith. When governments borrow heavily, they let current citizens enjoy benefits while forcing future generations to pay the bills. It's like maxing out credit cards and leaving the debt to your children. Smith watched European nations accumulate massive war debts, then struggle for decades under the crushing repayment burden. Tax policy revealed similar unfairness. Governments loved taxing basic necessities like bread and salt because these generated steady revenue. But such taxes devastated poor families who spent most of their income on survival needs. A tax on bread barely affects a wealthy merchant, but might force a laborer's family to go hungry. Smith argued this violated basic justice, since the poor carried a heavier relative burden than the rich. Colonial monopolies particularly infuriated Smith because they combined multiple evils. Trading companies like the British East India Company received exclusive rights to trade with entire continents. This arrangement enriched a few privileged investors while forcing both colonists and domestic consumers to pay inflated prices. Colonial producers had to sell cheap to the monopoly company, while home consumers paid premium prices for goods that should have been cheaper under free competition. Smith also attacked restrictions that prevented workers from moving between jobs or regions. Guild systems and settlement laws trapped people in specific trades or locations, even when better opportunities existed elsewhere. Similarly, when employers secretly agreed to fix wages at artificially low levels, they violated workers' natural right to sell their labor for fair market value. These criticisms shared a common thread. Smith judged policies not by whether they increased national power or merchant profits, but by their effects on human freedom and general welfare. He consistently sided with ordinary people against privileged interests.